Happy Tuesday to everybody out there. Okay, here we go. It is chapter 2 of the K. I think we're doing a wonderful job with it. I am waiting on a boat because I'm going to go search for a K myself. There's no guarantee I could ever find the K um, that's in the story, but I'll try to find some kind of island that's very similar. All right, so here we go with chapter 2 of the K. You remember what happened yesterday? Well, it looks dire. We have U-boats off the coast of Curacao, off the coast of Willemstad, and Philip is excited about war, wants to help out. He wants to fight the U-boats. He doesn't like the feeling, and his mom and dad they're struggling with each other because his mom doesn't want to be there. His dad feels obligated to do his job. Okay, this is chapter 2. We finished dinner just as it was getting dark, and my father went outside to look at our house. He wanted to see if the blackout curtains were working. While my mother and I stood by each window, he called out if he saw the slightest crack of light. By the governor's orders, not a light could shine anywhere on the whole island, he said. Then he went back to the refinery. Now think about that. Why do they need to have blackout curtains? They don't want any lights at all. It has something to do with the U-boats shelling, launching explosives onto the land. They don't want to waste their explosives in a cow pasture or a field. They'd want to hit something that has lights. They want to blow up buildings. I crawled onto the couch downstairs about 9 o'clock, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the U-boats off our coast and those lake tankers with barefooted Chinese sailors on board. I guess I was waiting for the U-boats to send a shell toward Willemstad. Then I began to wonder if the Germans would send soldiers too. About 9:30, I sneaked out of bed, went to the tool house, and took a hatchet out. A hatchet is like, a small axe, a handheld axe, one hand. I put it under the couch. It was the only thing I could think of to use for fighting the Germans in case they were to storm in his house. It must have been 11 o'clock when my father returned from the refinery to get all the flashlights we had in the house. They talked in low voices, but I could hear them. Mother said, "It's too dangerous to stay here now." My father answered, "Grace, you know I can't leave." She said, "Well, then Philip and I must go back. We'll go back to Norfolk," that's the city in Virginia, "and wait until the danger is over." I sat up in bed, unable to believe what I was hearing. My father said, "There's more danger in the trip back unless you go by air than there is in staying here. If they do shell us, they won't hit Scarloo." Mother said sharply, "You know I won't fly. I'd be frightened to death to fly." So we know something else about her. She's always afraid to fly. She would only want to take a boat. "We'll talk about it later." My father sounded miserable. Soon afterward, he returned to the refinery again. I thought about leaving the island, and it saddened me. I loved the old fort and the schooners, the Ruttercade market with the noisy chickens and squealing pigs, the black people shouting. I loved the Conoco with its giant cactus, the divvy-divvy trees, their odd branches all on the leeward side of the trunk, the beautiful sandy beach at West Punt, and I'd missed Heinrich van Boven. I also knew that Heinrich and his mother would think us cowardly if we left just because a few German submarines were off Curacao. I was awake most of the night. The next morning, my father said that the Chinese crews on the lake tankers that shuttled crude oil across the sandbars at Maracaibo had refused to sail without naval escorts, meaning warships that would help them and protect them. He said the refinery would have to close down within a day, and that meant precious gas and oil could not go to England or General Montgomery in the African desert. Those are two places that they're fighting. They're fighting in Europe, and they're also fighting in the Pacific Ocean. near Japan, and they're also fighting in the North African desert. For 7 days, not a ship moved by the Queen Emma Bridge, and there was a gloom over Willemstad. The people had been very proud that the little islands of Aruba and Curacao were now among the most important islands in the world, that victory or defeat depended on them. They were angry with the Chinese crews, and on the third day, my father said that mutiny charges had been placed against them. But, he said, you must understand, they are very frightened, and some of the people who are angry with them would not sail the little ships either. See, it's easy to blame somebody, but when you're the one that could get blown up, it makes a difference. He explained to me what it must feel like to ride the cargoes of crude oil, knowing that a torpedo or shell could turn the whole ship into flames any moment. Even though he wasn't a sailor, he volunteered to help man the lake tankers. So in their cargo, they have gas and or oil and things like that. And if a torpedo, which comes under the water, shot from a German U-boat or a submarine, were to hit them, or a shell launched from the sky or from the surface to the other surface, it would blow them up because all that stuff is flammable, oil and gas and things, it burns. Soon, of course, we might also run out of fresh water. It rains very little in the Dutch West Indies unless there is a hurricane. And water from the few wells has a heavy salt content. The big tankers from the United States or England always carried fresh water to us in ballast. And then it was distilled again so that we could drink it. But now all the big tankers were being held up in their ports until the submarines could be chased away. These U-boats out there are causing a big problem. Toward the end of the week, we began to run out of fresh vegetables because the schooner men were also afraid. Now my mother talked constantly about the submarines, the lack of water, and the shortage of food. It almost seemed that she was using the war as an excuse to leave Curacao. The ships will be moving again soon, my father said confidently, and he was right. I think it was February 21st that some of the Chinese sailors agreed to sail to Lake Maracaibo. But on that same day, a Norwegian tanker headed for Willemstad was torpedoed off Curacao, and fear again swept over the old city. Without our ships, we were helpless. Then, a day or two later, my father took me into the Scott Gap, where they were completing the loading of the SS Empire Tern, a big British tanker. So this is a big, big boat called the SS Empire Tern. And they always refer to boats as she. She had machine guns fore and aft, one of the few armed ships in the harbor. Although the trade wind was blowing, the smell of gas and oil lay heavy over the Scott Gap. Other empty tankers were there, high out of the water, awaiting orders to sail once they had cargoes. The men on them were leaning over the rail, watching all the activity on the Empire Tern. I looked on as the thick hoses that were attached to her quivered when the gasoline was pumped into her tanks. So this Empire Tern is taking on a lot of gas to take all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, well, through the Caribbean, into the Atlantic Ocean, all the way over to Europe, so that we can continue to fight, or to North Africa for airplanes. The fumes shimmered in the air, and one by one they topped her tanks, loading them right to the brim and securing them for sea. No one said very much. With all that aviation gasoline around, it was dangerous. Then, in the afternoon, we went to Punda and stood near the pontoon bridge as she steamed slowly down St. Anna Bay. Many others had come to watch too, even the governor. And we all cheered as she passed the boat, the Empire Tern. They all cheered, yes, go, make it there safely. Setting out on her lonely voyage to England. There, she would help refuel the Royal Air Force, the Royal British Air Force. The sailors on the Empire Turn, which was painted a dull white but had rust streaks all over, waved back at us and held up their fingers in a V for victory, the victory sign, not peace sign. Back then it was the victory sign. We will win. This is something that will help us win this World War II. We watched until the pilot boat, having picked up the harbor pilot from the Empire Turn, began to race back to Willemstad. Just as we were ready to go, there was an explosion, and we looked toward the sea. The Empire Turn had vanished in a wall of red flames, and black smoke was beginning to boil into the sky. Someone screamed, "There it is!" We looked off to one side of the flames, about a mile away, and saw a black shape in the water, very low. It was a German submarine, surfaced now to watch the ship die. A tug, meaning a tugboat, and several small motorboats headed out toward the turn, but it was useless. Some of the women cried at the sight of her, and I saw men, my father included, with tears in their eyes. It didn't seem possible that only a few hours before I had been standing on her deck. I was no longer excited about the war. I had begun to understand that it meant death and destruction. See, when he was a boy and he would play with Heinrich, it was fun. War was exciting, kind of like you. If you, I can't think of the game, but the combat games on TV, I'm sorry, on the video games and stuff, it's fun. War is exciting and interesting. Not anymore. And not anymore for Philip. He saw death and he saw people. He saw the men just a few minutes ago waving, smiling, doing something brave and something noble and something important. And now every single one of them on that boat are dead. And they are fathers. They are brothers. They are sons of other people that will miss them desperately. That same night, my mother told my father, "I'm taking Philip back to Norfolk." That's the city in Virginia. I knew she'd made up her mind. He was tired and disheartened over what had happened to the Empire Turn. He did not say very much, but I do remember him saying, "Grace, I think you're making a mistake. You are both quite safe here in Scarloo." I wondered why he didn't simply order her to stay. But he wasn't that kind of a man. He's different. Some husbands in that time period, would simply just order their wives and say, "Hey, you're going to stay no matter what." But his dad was he was different that way. He wasn't that type. The sunny days and dark, still nights passed slowly during March. The ships had begun to sail again, defying the submarines. Some were lost, meaning blown up. Heinrich and I often went down to Punda to watch them go out, hoping that they would be safe. Neither my father nor my mother talked very much about us leaving. I thought that when 2 American destroyers arrived, those are now Navy ships that have guns, along with the Dutch cruiser von Kingsbergen, to protect the lake tankers, Mother would change her mind, but it only made her more nervous. Then one day in early April, pay attention to the months too, because we're going to keep track of the time, but now we're in April, early April. She said, "Your father has finally secured passage for us so today will be your last day in school here, Philip. We'll start packing tomorrow, and on Friday we leave aboard a ship for Miami, Florida. Then we'll take the train to Norfolk, Virginia." Suddenly, I felt hollow inside. Then I became angry and accused her of being a coward. She told me to go off to school. I said I hated her. All that day in school, I tried to think of what I could do. I thought about going somewhere and hiding until the ship had sailed, but on an island the size of Curacao, there is no place to hide. Also, I knew it would cause my father trouble. That night, when he got home, I told him I wanted to stay with him. He smiled and put his long, thin arm around my shoulder. He said, "No, Philip, I think it is best that you go with your mother. At a time like this, I can't be at home very much." His voice seemed sad. Although he was trying to be cheerful, he told me how wonderful it would be to return to the United States, how many things I had missed while we were on the island. I couldn't think of one. Then I talked to my mother about staying on in Willemstad, and she became very upset with both of us. She said that we didn't love her and began to cry. My father finally ended it by saying, "Philip, the decision is made. You'll leave Friday with your mother." So I packed with her help and said goodbye to Heinrich van Boven and the other boys. I told them we'd be gone just a short time, that we were going to visit my grandparents, my mother's parents in Norfolk. But I had the feeling that it might be a very long time before I saw Curacao and my father again. Early Friday morning, we boarded the SS Hatto. So that's another name of a ship, a smaller ship. It's much smaller. We boarded the SS Hatto in St. Anna Channel. She was a small Dutch freighter with a high bow and stern and a bridge house in the middle between two well decks. I had seen her often in St. Anna Bay. Usually she ran between Willemstad, Aruba, and Panama. She had a long stack and always puffed thick black smoke. In our cabin, which was on the starboard side and opened out to the boat deck, my father said, "Well, you can rest easy, Phillips. The Germans would never waste a torpedo on this old tub." Yet I saw him looking over the lifeboats. Then he inspected the fire hoses on the boat deck. I knew he was worried. And I think you guys are good at that too. You know, your parents, sometimes they act like they're cheerful and they're trying to calm you for something, and yet you know that they're themselves nervous. That's one of these times. There were 8 other passengers aboard, and they were all saying goodbye to their relatives, just as we were saying goodbye to my father. In the tradition, people brought flowers and wine. It was almost like sailing in the days before the war, they told me. Father was smiling and very gay, meaning happy. But when the Hatto's whistle blasted out 3 times, meaning it was time to go, he said goodbye to us between clenched teeth. So that's one of those things where the inference, we now know his dad is really nervous and worried because he's talking between clenched teeth. I clung to him for a long time, a long hug. Finally, he said, "Take good care of your mother." I said I would. We sailed down St. Anna Bay, and the Queen Emma Bridge parted for us. It's the one that opens like a big arm. It opens like this. I showed you in that picture. And the Queen Emma Bridge parted for us. Through watery eyes, because he's crying, I saw the fort and the old buildings of Punda and Ostrabanda. Native schooners were beating in from the sea. Then my mother pointed. I saw a tall man standing on the wall of Fort Amsterdam waving at us. I knew it was my father. I'll never forget that tall, lonely figure standing on the seawall. He doesn't know when he'll see his dad again. That's tough. The SS Hatto took her first bite of open sea and began to pitch gently. We turned toward Panama as we had to make a call there before proceeding to Miami. Down on the well decks, fore and aft, were 4 massive pumps that had to be delivered to Colón, the port at the Atlantic entrance to the Panama Canal. I stayed out on deck for a long time, sitting by the lifeboat, looking back at Curacao, feeling lonely and sad. Finally, my mother said, "Come inside now." That was chapter 2. Okay, you guys are doing a great job. I hope it's an easy book to understand. It's straightforward. We'll get through this, and you guys are doing a great job. Make sure you look at you've looked at the book, and now you look at your questions for this chapter. Do it while it's fresh in your mind, and you'll answer them in your own words and put them in your website, your personal website. We'll talk about that later in class. All right, we will see you tomorrow on Wednesday. Okay, guys, take care and have a nice day today. Okay, bye-bye.